The Door in the Wall, H.G. Wells, a haunting tale of lost paradise. The Door in the Wall is more than just a classic short story. It is a profound meditation on memory, imagination, the choices we make, and the paradise we lose when we prioritize ambition over beauty and joy. Written by H.G. Wells and published in 1911, this haunting tale tells the story of a successful politician who, as a child, discovered a magical door in a wall that led to an enchanted garden. Throughout his life, he encounters this door again and again, but always chooses duty and ambition over the chance to return to that perfect place. The story asks fundamental questions about what makes life meaningful, whether success and achievement can compensate for lost wonder and happiness, and whether some opportunities once missed can never be recovered today. The Door in the Wall remains one of Wells's most beloved and discussed works, a story that resonates with anyone who has wondered whether they made the right choices in life. To understand The Door in the Wall, we must first understand its creator, H.G. Wells. Born Herbert George Wells in 1866 in Bromley, Kent, England, Wells came from a lower middle-class family struggling with poverty. His father was a shopkeeper and professional cricket player, and his mother worked as a housekeeper. Young Herbert was frail and sickly, spending much of his childhood reading because he could not participate in physical activities. This early immersion in books shaped his imagination and intellect. Wells won a scholarship to the Normal School of Science in London, where he studied biology under Thomas Henry Huxley, Darwin's famous advocate. This scientific education profoundly influenced Wells's thinking and writing, though he never completed his degree due to lack of interest in subjects other than biology. Wells began his writing career as a journalist and teacher, struggling financially and battling health problems, including a damaged kidney and tuberculosis. His breakthrough came with scientific romances, as early science fiction was called. The Time Machine, published in 1895, made Wells famous and established him as one of the founders of science fiction alongside Jules Verne. Wells followed this success with The Island of Dr. Moreau, The Invisible Man, The War of the Worlds, and other groundbreaking science fiction novels. However, Wells was more than just a science fiction writer. He also wrote realistic novels about social issues, short stories exploring human psychology and relationships, and nonfiction works on history, politics, and social reform. Wells was a passionate advocate for social justice, world government, women's rights, and scientific education. He was a complex, sometimes difficult man who had numerous affairs and complicated relationships, but he was also a brilliant thinker and storyteller. The Door in the Wall is quite different from Wells' famous science fiction works. There are no time machines, no Martian invaders, no invisible men. Instead, this is a subtle psychological story about memory, loss, and the paths not taken. The story is told by an unnamed narrator who recounts the confidences of his friend Lionel Wallace, a prominent politician with a brilliant career ahead of him. Wallace is successful by every worldly measure, respected and admired, on the verge of achieving even greater power and influence. However, Wallace confides to the narrator that his success feels hollow and meaningless because he has never been able to return to a place of perfect happiness he found as a child, a magical garden beyond a green door in a white wall. Wallace's story begins when he is 5 years old, a lonely child living in West Kensington in London. His mother has died, his father is cold and distant, and young Lionel is starved for affection and joy. One day, while wandering the streets, he sees a green door set in a white wall. The door is unlike anything around it, seeming out of place in the ordinary London street. Lionel feels an irresistible attraction to the door, and despite knowing that entering strange places is forbidden, he opens it and goes through. What he finds on the other side is a garden of extraordinary beauty and peace. The garden is filled with flowers more vivid than any he has seen, with paths leading to fascinating places, with animals that are friendly and unafraid. Most importantly, the garden is filled with love and acceptance. Beautiful people welcome Lionel with genuine affection. A kind woman, almost like an idealized mother, shows him wonders and makes him feel cherished. Wells's description of the garden is deliberately vague and dreamlike, allowing readers to imagine their own version of paradise. The garden has flowers and animals, but Wells does not catalog them precisely. There are buildings and people, but their exact nature remains mysterious. The garden has a quality of timelessness, where past, present, and future seem to flow together. Lionel sees a book in the garden that contains pictures of his own life, showing events that have already happened and some that have not yet occurred. The garden is not just a place, but a state of being, a condition of perfect happiness, acceptance, and understanding. It represents everything that is missing from Lionel's ordinary life: love, beauty, peace, and meaning. In the garden, Lionel experiences a joy so complete that nothing in his subsequent life ever quite matches it. However, this paradise is not permanent. After what seems like either moments or hours, Lionel finds himself back on the London street. The door has closed behind him, and when he looks back, it has vanished or blended into the wall so completely that he cannot find it again. He runs home and tells his father about the wonderful garden, but his father dismisses it as imagination or lies and punishes him for wandering off. This reaction is crucial to understanding the story. From that moment, Lionel learns that the real world, represented by his father, does not value or believe in the kind of experience he had in the garden. The practical, rational world considers such things childish fantasies that must be put aside in favor of duty, work, and ambition. As Lionel grows older, he encounters the green door several more times, but each time he chooses not to enter. The first time after his childhood visit, he sees the door while on his way to an important examination at school. He hesitates, knowing that going through the door will make him miss the exam, which would disappoint his tutors and harm his academic career. He chooses duty over desire and walks past the door. He passes his examination with honors and begins building the successful career that will define his life. But from that moment, he is haunted by the knowledge that he chose ambition over joy. As the years pass, Wallace sees the door again and again, always at moments when entering would conflict with his worldly responsibilities and ambitions. He sees it when hurrying to an important meeting that will advance his political career. He sees it when rushing to a social engagement with influential people. Each time, he tells himself he will go through the door next time, but each time He prioritizes his career and social position over the mysterious garden. The story Wallace tells his friend, the narrator is tinged with increasing desperation and regret. As Wallace achieves greater success in his political career, becoming more powerful and respected, he realizes that all his achievements feel empty compared to that lost garden of his childhood. He describes his successful life as a kind of prison where he has gained the whole world but lost something infinitely more valuable. The tragedy is that Wallace knows what he has lost and understands that he has chosen wrongly, yet he feels trapped by the momentum of his own choices. He has built a life and identity based on worldly success, and returning to the garden would mean abandoning everything he has worked for. Yet that worldly success brings him no real happiness or satisfaction. The narrator, who tells us Wallace's story, is skeptical at first, wondering whether the garden was real or merely a childhood fantasy that Wallace has romanticized over the years. This ambiguity is central to the story's power. Wells never definitively tells us whether the garden was a real magical place or a symbolic representation of childhood innocence and happiness that Wallace has idealized in memory. The narrator observes that Wallace seems genuinely tormented by his memories and his missed opportunities to return to the garden. Wallace is not a fantasist or dreamer, but a practical, successful man who nevertheless cannot escape the feeling that he has missed the most important thing in life. This makes his story more troubling and thought-provoking than if he were simply a romantic dreamer unsuited to the real world. The ending of The Door in the Wall is ambiguous and haunting. Wallace tells the narrator that he is determined to go through the door the next time he encounters it, regardless of what worldly obligations he must abandon. Shortly after this conversation, Wallace is found dead at the bottom of a construction excavation. He apparently walked through a door in a construction fence in the dark and fell to his death. The narrator is left wondering whether Wallace finally found his door and deliberately chose to go through it, knowing or not knowing that it led not to the garden but to death. Or did Wallace, in the darkness and perhaps distracted by thoughts of the garden, simply make a fatal mistake, walking through an ordinary door he mistook for the magical one? Or perhaps, in a way, death itself was the door he had been seeking all along, the only escape from a life he found increasingly meaningless. The ambiguity of the ending allows for multiple interpretations, each offering different insights into the story's meaning. If Wallace deliberately chose death over continued worldly success, the story becomes a tragedy about a man who could no longer bear the emptiness of his accomplished life. If he accidentally walked to his death while seeking the garden, the story is an even more bitter tragedy, suggesting that his lifelong preoccupation with the lost garden blinded him to real dangers. If the construction site door somehow was the magical door, and Wallace died trying to return to his paradise, the story asks disturbing questions about the price of seeking transcendence, and whether some kinds of happiness are incompatible with earthly existence. The story works regardless of which interpretation one accepts, which is a mark of its literary sophistication. The themes of The Door in the Wall are rich and multi-layered. At its most basic level, the story is about the conflict between imagination and duty, between the life of wonder and the life of worldly achievement. Wells himself struggled with this conflict throughout his career. He wanted to be a serious political thinker and social reformer, but he was most successful and beloved for his imaginative fiction. He spent much of his later life writing nonfiction works on politics, history, and world government that are now largely forgotten. while his early scientific romances and stories like The Door in the Wall remain widely read and loved. Like his character Wallace, Wells sometimes seemed to resent the very thing he was best at because it distracted from what he considered more important work. The story also explores the nature of childhood and the loss of childhood wonder. The garden represents a state of being that is only fully accessible to children who have not yet learned to prioritize practical concerns over joy and beauty. As we mature, we learn to dismiss such experiences as fantasies or distractions from real life. We internalize the attitudes of Wallace's father, who punishes his son for believing in something wonderful rather than encouraging his imagination. The story suggests that this necessary process of growing up involves a loss that we spend the rest of our lives trying to recover, though perhaps it can never be fully regained. Wallace's tragedy is that he remembers clearly what he has lost, but cannot find a way back to it. Memory and its reliability is another important theme. Is Wallace's garden a real memory of a magical experience, or has he, over the years, transformed an ordinary childhood memory into something extraordinary? The narrator wonders about this, and readers must wonder too. Wells understood that memory is not a simple recording of past events, but a creative process that reconstructs and interprets the past. What we remember and how we remember, it says as much about our present state of mind as about the past itself. Wallace's memory of the garden may be less important as a factual record than as a symbol of everything missing from his adult life. Whether the garden was real or imagined, Wallace's feelings of loss and regret are undeniably real and affect every aspect of his life. The story also addresses the question of whether success and achievement can ever fully satisfy the human soul. Wallace has everything that society says should make a person happy: wealth, respect, power, and the promise of even greater achievements. Yet he is profoundly unhappy because he has sacrificed something essential to gain these worldly goods. Wells seems to be questioning the value systems of Edwardian England, which emphasized duty, career, and social position while dismissing beauty, wonder, and emotional fulfillment as frivolous or childish. The story suggests that no amount of worldly success can compensate for the loss of genuine joy and meaning. This was a radical message in 1911 and remains challenging today in a society still largely organized around achievement and material success. The symbolic richness of The Door in the Wall has made it a favorite of literary critics and psychologists. The door itself is an ancient symbol representing opportunity, choice, transition, and the boundary between different states of being. The green color of the door might suggest nature, growth, and life, while the white wall could represent civilization, barriers, or the constructed world that separates us from nature. The garden is obviously symbolic of paradise, whether we interpret that as Eden, heaven, childhood innocence, or some ideal state of human existence. The fact that Wallace repeatedly sees the door but chooses not to enter might represent the human tendency to postpone happiness, always thinking we will attend to what truly matters later, after we have handled our current obligations, never realizing that later may never come. The psychological dimensions of the story are equally fascinating. Wallace's inability to return to the garden, despite desperately wanting to, suggests the power of habits, social conditioning, and the identities we construct for ourselves. He has become so identified with his role as a successful politician that he cannot imagine abandoning it, even though that role brings him no happiness. This is a trap many people find themselves in, having built lives and careers that look successful from the outside but feel empty and meaningless from the inside. The story asks whether we have the courage to make radical changes when we realize we have taken the wrong path, or whether we are doomed to continue in directions chosen long ago, even when we know they lead away from happiness. The style and structure of The Door in the Wall are deceptively simple. Wells tells the story in straightforward prose, without experimental techniques or complex narrative structures. The frame narrative, with the unnamed narrator recounting Wallace's confidences, creates a sense of distance and allows for multiple perspectives on the events. We experience the story through two filters: Wallace's telling of his own experience and the narrator's interpretation of what Wallace told him. This double remove from the events makes the truth even more ambiguous and encourages readers to form their own interpretations. The simplicity of Wells's prose style makes the story accessible while not diminishing its psychological and philosophical depth. The reception of The Door in the Wall has been consistently positive since its publication. Unlike some of Wells's work, which was controversial or became dated, this story has maintained its appeal across generations and cultures. Readers from very different backgrounds and times find something universal in Wallace's predicament. Anyone who has felt torn between duty and desire, between what they should do and what they want to do, can relate to his struggle. Anyone who has looked back on their life with regret, wondering what might have been if they had made different choices, understands Wallace's torment. The story speaks to fundamental human experiences that transcend its specific Edwardian English setting. The influence of The Door in the Wall on later literature and culture has been significant. The story established patterns and themes that many later writers explored. The idea of a doorway to another world, a place of magic or wonder accessible from ordinary reality, appears in countless fantasy stories. C.S. Lewis's Narnia books, with their wardrobe door leading to a magical land, owe something to Wells's story, though Lewis develops the theme in different directions. The theme of the paradise lost through wrong choices appears throughout 20th century literature. The story's ambiguity about whether the garden is real or imagined influenced later magical realism and stories that blend realistic and fantastic elements without clearly distinguishing between them. The biographical elements in The Door in the Wall reflect Wells's own struggles and regrets. By 1911, when the story was published, Wells was a successful and famous writer, but he was increasingly frustrated with the direction his life had taken. His personal life was complicated by affairs and the tensions between his desire for free love and his guilt over the pain he caused others. His professional life involved constant tension between his desire to be a serious political thinker and his genius for imaginative fiction. He had health problems that reminded him of his mortality. In Wallace's story of missed opportunities and lost paradise, Wells may have been expressing his own feelings of regret and wondering whether his choices had led him toward or away from what truly mattered. The story has a personal, confessional quality unusual in Wells's work, as if he was writing about his own deepest fears and regrets. The philosophical questions raised by The Door in the Wall have no easy answers. Is it better to have experienced perfect happiness once, even if it cannot be recaptured, or to have never experienced it at all. Is duty more important than personal happiness? Or is pursuing happiness a higher duty than following social expectations? Should we structure our lives around achieving success and respect? Or should we prioritize experiences of beauty and joy, even if they seem impractical? Can we ever recover the wonder and openness of childhood? Or is that permanently lost to adult consciousness? Is the garden Wallace seeks a real place, a psychological state, a memory, or perhaps an impossible ideal that can never be achieved by human beings? Wells poses these questions but does not presume to answer them definitively, respecting the complexity of human existence too much to offer simple solutions. In conclusion, The Door in the Wall is a story that haunts readers long after they finish it. H.G. Wells created a tale that is simultaneously simple and profound, realistic and fantastic, specific to its time, and utterly timeless. Through Lionel Wallace's tragedy, Wells explores fundamental questions about how we should live, what we should value, and whether the paths we choose lead toward or away from genuine happiness and meaning. The story's power lies partly in its ambiguity, allowing each reader to interpret the garden and Wallace's fate according to their own experiences and beliefs. But the story's power also lies in its emotional truth. Most of us have our own versions of the green door, opportunities we did not take, moments of beauty or joy we sacrificed for practical concerns, possibilities we postponed until they disappeared. The enduring relevance of The Door in the Wall comes from its insight into the human condition. We all face choices between immediate pleasure and long-term goals, between duty and desire, between what others expect of us and what our hearts truly want. We all construct identities and life paths that can become traps, continuing in directions we chose long ago, even when we realize they are not leading where we truly want to go. We all experience moments of transcendent beauty or joy that we try to recapture but never quite can. We all wonder, at times, whether we have made the right choices and whether it is too late to change course. Wallace's story is our story, and his tragedy is the tragedy potentially awaiting anyone who postpones happiness too long or mistakes achievement for fulfillment. Wells suggests through this story that there are some things more important than success, some experiences more valuable than achievement, some states of being more essential than doing. The garden represents whatever it is that makes us feel most alive, most connected, most ourselves. For some it might be art or music or nature. For others it might be love or spiritual experience or creative work. Whatever form it takes, Wells suggests that we sacrifice this essential thing at our peril, that no amount of worldly success can compensate for its loss, and that we must have the courage to walk through the door when it appears, even if that means abandoning plans and disappointing others. The story warns us not to become like Wallace, always planning to attend to what truly matters next time, tomorrow, after this current obligation is fulfilled, only to discover that next time never comes. If you found this exploration of The Door in the Wall meaningful, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into classic literature. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts on Wallace's choices and whether you think the garden was real. What doors have you walked past in your own life? Have you ever sacrificed happiness or fulfillment for achievement or duty, and do you regret it? What would you do if you encountered your own green door in the wall? These questions matter because how we answer them determines how we live our lives. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep exploring the great works that challenge us to examine our choices and consider what truly matters in the brief time we have. The door is always there, waiting. The only question is whether we have the courage to walk through it.